This year, MABE, the National Association for Bilingual Education, held their annual conference, and during the opening session, Secretary of Education Miguel Cardona thanked the teachers who helped him when he was a bilingual student in Connecticut. In particular, he thanked Gladys Lavas and referred to her as one of the giants who opened doors for bilingual education. We would like to recognize the giants who opened the doors for the first 25 years of bilingual education in Massachusetts. Hearing their words give us insight into the history of MABE's advocacy work. It is our pleasure to honor the individuals behind these early movements. My name is Marla Perez-Sayes. I was MABE president from 1997 to 1999 and served on the MABE board for many years. Together, we will explore what we call the crisis response cycle, how threats to bilingual education shape the community of practice and collaboration through the years. We will see the first 25 years of bilingual education through the eyes of our four giants and how their contributions have marked bilingual education in Massachusetts: Cecilia Soriano, Pat Londeron, Maria Brisk, and Ginny Sanger. Their stories are in response to challenges to bilingual education during the 1970s, 1980s, and 1990s. Our first speaker is Cecilia Soriano, who used the performing arts as a medium to showcase the success of bilingual students and elevate their status in the community. After fundraising efforts in the late 1970s, Boston's bilingual programs were able to celebrate culture through performances that brought together bilingual students and the community and created traditions that are still alive today. Cecilia shows how, hand in hand with local organizations like MABE, it is possible to be a catalyst and continue the hard work of breaking the crisis response cycle and elevating bilingualism.
At the time that we went for the grant, I was working for the Office of Cultural Affairs in Boston because we had so many new bilingual populations coming into the city and into the system, the school system, that we should try to get grants both from the National Endowment for the Arts and from the Office of Bilingual Education, because that way we would have the greatest impact in the entire community, families of the students and the students themselves. And so it was fortuitous in that the National Endowment for the Arts gave us a huge grant, that is to the Office of Cultural Affairs, and then having the opportunity to meet John Molina, who was the director of bilingual education in Washington, D.C. And so I told him about what our dream was, which was to have a bilingual, multilingual theater arts program in the Boston Public Schools, that it would bring all the different groups, all the different bilingual groups together, and it would demonstrate the richness that all of these languages and cultures brought to the system and enrich the lives of all the students. The Office of Bilingual Education in Boston got a $5 million grant that spread over 5 years so that we could in fact entrench the arts and theater arts in particular, which included dance, into the schools. And it would give an arena for each of the different groups to demonstrate their arts, their culture, their music, their language. And it was so exciting because after the first year, after we had all our theater artists, we had gathered them and trained them, worked with them, we then started having an annual celebration at the end of the school year where all the different programs would have representative performances from each of their schools. And the principals, of course, all recognized how beneficial thing this would be for the students to have. So they allowed it in their schedule for the students to have 2 or 3 classes a week. And so 2 times a year, there would be enough time to have prepared a performance. Well, that made the students so proud of being able to work in their language, work in their art form, whatever it was, and then be able to show to the rest of the students in the school where they were, and then to come together at the celebration of all the schools. And then, of course, not only the students, but the parents and the community would be invited to those performances. And each one of them was just so joyous. In terms of the school system, of course, to be able to have gotten $5 million from that sector was impactful right away, because the bottom line speaks volumes. And then when they saw how it kept the attendance of the bilingual students coming, because they didn't want to miss those classes for their arts classes. And whenever those classes are held in schools, the students don't want to miss them. They love it. This was motivating for the students to remain in school, to attend classes, to be on time. That, of course, speaks volumes to the administration. And then, because self-confidence and identity is so important to a student being able to perform well academically, it improved their scores. It improved their learning as well. They felt that they had a place in the school. They didn't feel alienated or not as much anymore. And their performance academically improved as well.
Cecilia's work to elevate bilingualism through the arts was a form of advocacy. And at the core of advocating bilingualism is the concept that bilingual education is not just a gift, but a right. In the late 1970s, Pat Landerand worked for the Massachusetts Department of Education and found many misconceptions about bilingualism and special education. The intersection between bilingual education and special education, and her work in training local, state, and national stakeholders that bilingualism is not a disability, remains alive in MABE today in our long-lived special education network. This is a key to breaking the crisis response cycle.
In the 70s, the climate was predominantly in Massachusetts that if a student was getting bilingual services and had potentially a disability, that student would not be assessed and would not receive special ed services. There were some special ed directors that actually would call bilingual ed special ed. The first year I served in 1977 as the bilingual special ed director, and I went into many classrooms, special ed classrooms. It was so disheartening to see high-functioning bilingual students who were being placed with monolingual English-speaking students with severe disabilities in the same classroom. And they were there because obviously the assessments were done in English. They were not giving proper assessments in place there. Pretty much we saw bilingual directors frustrated that special ed would not serve their students. A few of the things we attempted to do, first of all, was to do training. And so we did extensive staff development with special ed teachers, trying to get them to understand that the language difference and learning problems were two different things, and also to get them to understand the challenges that the bilingual students were facing. We met with a great deal of resistance because there was a lot of insensitivity. We did bilingual training with the teachers to really help them understand that they weren't doing their students any good by holding on to them all, and that they needed to advocate for their students. They were hunting for curriculum. They didn't have books. They were not accepted in the schools. In many ways, they were parents to their children, and they were suffering too, in not being accepted and being outsiders in the school. Ultimately, we understood that the biggest issue for us was to pull together the bilingual teacher and the special ed teachers and the directors, and really tried to do some cross-fertilization and coordinated training. And I'd say that was probably the most successful attempt, we had. And teachers love that because they finally got to connect with each other. And that was also a really important thing because everyone was isolated.
Yeah.
And when they're isolated, they're depowered. We also felt that we needed to get federal money because we needed to involve higher ed, and we needed to get new programs that teachers could get certified in that field of bilingual special ed or ESL special ed. So Massachusetts really became pioneers in getting the federal government to address the issue. And the Bilingual Special Ed Project got the federal government to set aside money in professional development money to fund 34 projects throughout the United States that were earmarked for nothing but bilingual special ed. And then they also set up a project that set up a national task force to really look at bilingual special ed across the country. So I was really excited with the Bilingual Special Ed Project.
Pat's work grew to a national level and shaped what bilingual special education looks like today. Advocacy has always been a key aspect of not just MABE's identity, but our mission as we work with legislators, education departments, universities, families, community-based organizations, and districts to ensure that our schools have the resources, knowledge, and skills they need to provide our students the most effective and equitable education. Maria Brisk, who will be addressing the role of advocacy in the crisis response cycle, will be speaking about her experiences collaborating with families when she first arrived in Boston in the early 1980s.
There was a lot of sense of urgency to find and prepare teachers, to get curriculum. So the basic things that the schools needed, it was a constant battle against the attitude that bilingual students had a problem. And the schools had to fix this problem. Desegregation saw the issue of education based on race, and the needs of the bilingual students was based on language. And there was a lot of advocacy on the part of bilinguals about it. What we needed to make the people involved in the decisions around the segregation understand is that the bilingual students needed to be assigned to schools that offer the programs in their language and not assigned by race. That's where the role of the Comité de Padres, which was a parent organization that was put together especially for desegregation and to support the needs of the bilingual students, requested this policy of assigning first the bilingual kids by language to the schools that offer the programs in those languages. And so we saved actually transitional bilingual education just by that policy. The teachers in the bilingual programs had a very special role because they were not there only for the academics, but they saw their role as supporting the well-being of the children and the family, and they advocated for them going to hearings at the legislature and testifying, but also addressing the needs of the everyday needs of the students and their family. They were very special people that served not only an educational but a major social purpose, advocating for the students, the families, and then the program on the political side. Part of being a bilingual scholar is being an advocate, meeting with them, hearing their needs, and then phrasing them in the lingo of the research based principles, which they had said them in their own words, but they needed that side of the backing to be heard. Advocacy was in the hands of everybody. That was the only way to go.
Maria's legacy is so influential that a wave of her graduate students, also known as the Briskers, swept the Northeast and gave life to Maria's belief that advocacy is everyone's responsibility. In the 1990s, Ginny Sanger showed how advocacy in the crisis response cycle can take many shapes. Storytelling is a powerful tool, and Ginny worked to compile testimonials that allowed MABE to carry out a campaign strategy to educate the public about goals and realities of bilingual education and effect policy. Facilitating student voices and showcasing portraits of success inspired and propelled bilingualism, leading to a decade of support for bilingual education at the legislative level.
So in 1971, Massachusetts was the first state in the nation to pass legislation mandating districts to set up bilingual education programs. I began teaching the next year, and along with the excitement we felt developing curriculum from scratch and building programs in many languages across the state, we met with opposition at many levels right from the start. Along with the racist attitudes towards our students, there was great misunderstanding about bilingual education itself. Every year, it seemed, an anti-bilingual bill would be introduced in the legislature, and MABE would collaborate with the bilingual parent advisory councils to organize thousands of parents and students to descend on the hearings at the State House to let lawmakers know how important these programs were. We were told that our yearly turnout on Beacon Hill was the largest for any issue. But we got really tired of always being on the defensive. As bilingual educators, we saw how students blessed with bilingual brains could thrive in classrooms that nurtured both languages. And so in 1991, MABE raised $50,000 to tell that story. The video that we produced, Portraits of Success, helped our colleagues, our principals, and our parents understand the benefits of bilingual programs. It was translated into 6 languages and distributed to parent advisory councils statewide through DESE. We disseminated it through a public information campaign that MABE spearheaded, the Coalition for Bilingual Education. And the year it came out, it was shown at the plenary session of the National Association for Bilingual Education, NABE. As the video's producer, I was eager to share it with our legislators on Beacon Hill. And so in 1992, MABE organized a legislative breakfast at the State House to showcase the video. I'm a little hazy about the year, and I certainly don't remember the breakfast that was served. But what I do remember was the power of letting our students speak for themselves so articulately through the video that we shared with the 30 or 40 state senators and reps who came. It truly changed the conversation. And though we did continue to troop up to Beacon Hill hearings when necessary, I believe that the video helped to ensure that the Massachusetts legislature let the bilingual education law stand for the next 10 years until the voters passed Question 2, the UNS initiative.
The first 25 years of bilingual education in Massachusetts from the 1970s to the 1990s are still teaching us lessons today. By igniting the sparks, advocates like Maria, Pat, Jeannie, Cecilia, and countless others started to break the crisis response cycle. History has seen through the eyes of these four giants who opened the doors for bilingual education sounds familiar to the struggles that dual language education programs are still facing today. As Jeannie mentioned, after the referendum on Question 2 came into effect in 2002, limiting bilingual education in Massachusetts, MABE continued the work to build a language opportunity coalition, which advocated for 15 years to change legislation and policy in favor of dual language education program. In 2017, the Look Act was finally passed, allowing districts to create programming that best fits students' needs. Today, dual language education is the new face of bilingualism in schools. Although legislation encouraging bilingual education has been passed at both the federal and state level, change on the ground at the schools and communities can be slower to follow, and challenges remain. Every day, thanks to all your efforts, our students benefit from progress made daily in classrooms. Activists like our four giants today have paved the way for us to follow. It is our responsibility to take up their mantle and with critical consciousness at the core of our awareness, continue to break the crisis response cycle.